Are we live yet?
I think they're going to give us a cue.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, good.
Not
Thank
yet.
you. Thank you.
And now
Claudia,
we're live.
we might be talking when the president is elected.
We're live now.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Dower, and I am Artistic Director at ArtsEmerson. And I am here with dear friends. And I'll introduce Claudia Rankine, who just phenomenal thought partner for us over many years here at ArtsEmerson, and an incredible author, and the author of this book that we're going to be talking about today. And then I'm going to kick it to David to introduce himself, and then you can kick it wherever you want from there.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone, and hello to Claudia and to everyone who's listening. I'm David Howse. I'm the executive director here at ArtsEmerson. And to David's point, we have been in conversation with Claudia on a number of things for many years. And so it felt so appropriate to pick up a conversation between friends. And for those, Claudia, you may not know, but this is the last official conversation between David and myself in this particular configuration. We'll have many other conversations that we can think of no better kind of sort of culminating official conversation than to have it with you on this very topic. So thank you for spending the time with us this evening.
Thank you, and congratulations to you both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of change.
Moment.
Lots of change. And David, why don't you want to kick us off into the conversation, just as if we're sitting around Claudia's lovely fire and warmth of her home?
Yeah, and happy holidays to everybody. Claudia, thank you for bringing the holiday spirit to the conversation. I am in Santa Cruz, California, and I work out of an old fruit shed in an orchard, so I'm sitting in a shed.
Oh.
But it's really lovely to see the tree. Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit when we were thinking about doing this, but the particular subjects of your latest book, Just Us, An American Conversation, they really struck both David and myself right in the middle of our own conversations, our own efforts to have conversation around this. And so, we sort of looked right to you. As soon as the book came out, we both ended up getting it right away, neither one of us planning that. And picking it up, discovering, oh, Claudia, you have insights and you're having similar conversations to what David and I are trying to have. And so we just thought we would, chop that part of it up a bit. Like, what is the conversation around whiteness? How do you have both a personal stake in those conversations, a presence in the conversation, you stay in them without becoming the problem in them, all of those big ideas that are in this book. But first, I just wondered if you would talk a little bit, what's the reception of the book? How's the book going for you? What's your sense of the book in the world right now?
Well, the book is a book about process. And it's a book that demands close reading. It's a book that asks for the time that it takes, given its construction, with both with pages that are actually conversations in and of themselves, because the verso recto page speak back to each other. So in many ways, I don't think it's a book for everyone. I think if you go to reading looking for solutions, you're not going to find that in Just Us. Just Us is a book about enacting something and hoping that with the hope that the enactment will allow openings in your own conversations. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know really what the reception is person to person, but my hope for the book is that it is allowing people to approach conversations more easily, more without having the notion that success is comfort.
Mm. And so in that way, mean, you've shared the book is your own process, right? I mean,
Exactly.
there's nothing in here that's pre-processed or where you don't even seem to be an expert at points in it. Like
Oh,
you're
I don't know.
fact checking yourself.
Exactly. I'm like, wait, why did I say that?
But I think it's so critical. I love that you talk about the book as a process because, as you can imagine, because of your earlier writings and your in all kinds of articles and journals and in your books, people do think of you as the person with all the answers. And to come into this relationship with the book and into the writing with this sense of this, it's a journey, it's a process, and your vulnerability in your process to share that with people as a way for us to see our own way into those conversations. And what I appreciate about it is, in many ways, from my point of view, this is a different kind of vulnerability than even the books that came before it, because we get to see Claudia in the lived experience of knowing and not knowing, and that permission. And I'm curious about how that journey from, the earlier writings to sort of just us, and then if it's just us now, then I'm getting to the end, but then what's next? But in this, how did you arrive to this set of writings that actually truly revealed a more deeper Claudia Rankine?
Well, I think that Just Us is a book of questions, basically. And I believe in pedagogy. I've been teaching for forever, years and years and years and years.
Forever,
Years
yes.
and years and years. And so I was in the classroom with my students, and many of the students were asking their own family members about their own, how anti-Blackness functions in their lives, or how whiteness functions in their lives, and how it came to be what it is, and controls so much and is so real, even as it is a constructed thing. And so I thought, they're asking people questions, so why not try it myself? and and as I say in the book, the group that I am least in conversation with are white men I don't know, because white men don't approach me as, oh, I'm gonna go shoot the breeze with that Black woman standing over there. And so I thought I would, I travel a lot for work. They travel a lot for work, apparently, since they're the ones sitting next to me. So I would have conversations with them. And so that's how it began. And then after that, I began to have other conversations, or it's not even that I had conversations for the book. It was that I was in conversation, and those conversations opened up to the project of the book, if that makes sense. So that's how it sort of, and I wanted to be myself in the world. This was my world. There's nothing made up. It's either me with my close friends, or me with my husband, or me with our what do you call those people, family therapists, me with whoever. And I didn't want to, I wanted to show that it showed up in all places in my life, with my daughter, anywhere I happen to be. It's not a conversation that happens only in box A. It's a conversation of the life.
Well, one of the things about it that struck me right away, and we have this extraordinary privilege, David and I, of just time to chat with you, in different circumstances, and the book really did feel like conversations with Claudia. Like they didn't seem to be in any way performative. They actually seemed like you captured yourself, and I was wondering how it's feeling to you. I mean, one of the things I love about Citizen, I remember you very specifically answering a question when you were here at Emerson right after Citizen was published, and someone was trying to frame a question by making it about you and your experience in one of the pieces of writing. And you were very clear about there's a second person in the whole book. Like you should be very careful about assuming that any of this is my experience, but it's someone's experience in Citizen. But this one, this all is your experience.
It's my experience.
And does that feel different to walk around in the world with that hanging out like that?
Well, no, you know, one of the things about Citizen is that because those were collected stories, I didn't really feel like I could give them an interior life.
No.
And, you know, because people out there who I had gotten the stories from would be like, why is she saying I thought that? I didn't think that. And so I tried to strip Citizen back to the events and the interactions without any kind of interiority being projected onto what was happening. In Just Us, the whole thing is about the interiority, and the only interiority that I have access to 24/7 is my own. And so it became necessary to use myself as subject, in fact. And, you know, and I was also really interested in, you know, I don't know if you know exactly the process of each essay, but I hired a psychiatrist and for the project, and a fact checker for the project, and a lawyer. I didn't hire the lawyer. The lawyer volunteered her services for the process. And all of them, when, you know, the psychiatrist and I met every time I wrote down one of these essays and I read it to her. And I would say to her, why do you think I said what I said? Why do you think I was feeling that? And why do you think the other person responded in the way that they responded? And our conversation informed the ways in which I was able to open out the essay. And so I'd go back and rewrite, not exactly rewrite, but add in the insights I got in those sessions. Then I went to the fact checker and I handed it over, and he went through and he followed the paper trail of, he's like, you know, well, it's this court case or this sociologist that supports this. What you said is almost right, but it's off by this much. and together, and then I also fact checked. So then we together came up with all of that. And then the lawyer went through and said, you know, you might not want to use this. This is a more relevant case for you. And so that added in, that's why the notes are so prominent, because that was its own process. So it ended up on those verso pages. But then how do I get the interiority of the person to whom I am speaking, if I've done all this work for my own interiority on the page? So I decided that I would send the essay back to the person I had the conversation with. Love and that. Ask them to write down what they were thinking. No one ever said to me, this is not what happened. Everyone said, this is the conversation we had, but it's not what I meant. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and those people with the Fairview essay, for example, she wrote down what she meant. Sometimes people said, no, this is what happened. This is a conversation we had. I don't need to add anything in to this. And so then it got printed as such. And then with the man on the plane, the final gentleman, he surprisingly to me wrote back and said, I don't know why I did this, but I told you things that were not true. Yeah. Which shocked me and made me like him even more, because he was like, I have no idea why I presented this narrative to you that is not true to my life.
And like he made up facts as well as feelings.
Yeah, exactly. Or he made up facts to create feelings.
Yeah.
That suited who he wants to be in the world and what he wants the world to be.
And you were a stranger to him. Like he could have been anybody and never told you that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, I mean, and the only reason I was able to contact him was because after the flight, he then bought my books and read them and contacted me and asked if my husband and I wanted to meet him and his wife for dinner. And we never did, actually, because, he has a company, everybody's busy. and it never happened. But then the first essay, as you know, was published in the New York Times, and it was going to be in the newspaper. So I'm like, I had this really nice conversation with this guy. I don't want him to open up the New York Times and find our conversation on the page. So because he had written me, I now had his email. So I was able to write to him and say, look, I want you to know I included our conversation in this piece. And if you ever have time to respond to it, I would love that. And I will print it as you send. I won't change it. I'll just print what you send to me. And he did.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the Fairview chapter, and for those of you who haven't read the book, or even if you're in the middle of the book, this comes up later in the book, so it's not much of a spoiler alert, but it is later in the book. We're not in order here, but you titled that, I think, Ethical Loneliness. That's the title of that essay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the first time loneliness crops up in this work. And I have to say, I resonate with that. I feel like, and I want to hear you talk a little bit about what it is, but I resonate with this sense of being alone with this work. Like it's so private, and we do it so publicly. David and I do it like here on these town halls, and we do it with the staff. But I always have a sense of being alone in it, and I don't know if that's what you mean, or what the loneliness is that you're speaking to in this book, or even if you are speaking to loneliness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am speaking to loneliness, but ethical loneliness, as put forward by the philosopher Jill Stober, is about a special kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness that happens, each of us have experiences in our lives that allow us to feel isolated or alone. But the world doesn't necessarily support those feelings in terms of stepping right in and replicating it. But for her, ethical loneliness are those moments when the world reflects the loneliness. So you're a Black man, you feel isolated, you feel threatened, you feel alone, and then Floyd is murdered, and you're like, oh yeah, there is a whole dynamic out in the world that supports this feeling of loneliness. It's not mine alone. Mm-hmm. It's part of the ethos and the ethics of this country. So in that way, it's a little bit different from I think what you're talking about is that the kind of loneliness that happens when we're inside an endeavor in terms of thinking about how to negotiate race relations in this country that needs 24/7 attention, that there's no solution that works on Monday and Thursday, that because these people are changing, things are changing, we are constantly on alert to address the ways in which white supremacy has sort of corrupted every aspect of our life in this country. And so we're all constantly negotiating that. And so you're never quite stable in the negotiation of that. And that causes a kind of sense of feeling alone in the negotiation of a thing.
Yeah. A couple of threads I want to pick up on, and I'll pick up on this one, in this notion of talking about sort of ethical loneliness, and talking about your process, and talking about your, in really putting yourself at the center of these stories, you owning these stories. And I align that with this notion of staying in the room that you talk about in the book, and the you'd rather be right than, what did you say? I'd rather learn that being right pales with staying in the room, this notion there. And I've been thinking a lot about that, sort of, what does it mean to stay in the room? Who has the privilege of staying in the room? Who has the privilege of leading? We've heard, the truth is, like, who really actually leaves? But wondering how you think about the imbalance of this proposition of staying in the room, is it the same as a Black woman to stay in the room as it is for a white man to stay in the room? Are there differences that need to be negotiated in your thinking as you've been sort of writing and thinking about this topic of staying in the room?
I think in the way that I'm thinking about staying in the room, which is tied to continuing a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
then there is no difference.
Mm-hmm.
Because it means that, you know, Fanon talks about reciprocal recognitions, the idea that I am not just for me, I am here also for a kind of human good. And so if I think I'm right and I walk out, or you think you're right and you walk out, that ends everything.
Mm-hmm.
But if we both are like, I know what I know, I think I know, but what is it you think you know? And how do we get together? That's a negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the management of both yourself and the other in service of something larger. And that takes work. It takes work on both sides. It's not, I mean, I think what I'm hearing in your question is that if white people have a certain kind of power and a black woman doesn't have that power, how is it an equal situation? It's not an equal situation if it's not a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is a conversation, then it means both people are managing all of that knowledge, including who has power. That's part of what is being managed. It's part of what is being spoken to. And none of it leaves the room. It you know what I mean? It all is out on the table to be worked with. But both party has to be willing to have the conversation. One person can't be in conversation and the other person is like, well, say what you say, but I've got the power. That's not a conversation.
Right. And that's so often how it goes. We had such an interesting conversation, and I have to say, I had a very different sort of reaction, a response to that notion of where that balance lives, but this notion of being right or staying in the conversation. And I think that's part of the challenge, because in so many ways, our discourse is around convincing you that I'm right and you're wrong.
Right.
And like, if we talked about this notion of agreeing to disagree, that's also not a conversation, right?
That's not
And
a conversation.
it definitely takes persistence and a level of generosity. And I
Mhm.
guess where I was struggling with this notion is, as if we leave the room, let's go with this binary, a white man and a Black woman, there is a body that we've been socialized to understand who's right and who's wrong going from that conversation. And so when I say being in that space together is almost an unbalanced proposition, it feels to me that there is a level of extra work required from, in this case, the Black woman, to stay in that conversation, unlike it is required of the white man. But, you know, I want to think more about that, but that's where that question comes from.
Well, I think this is why I was really grateful for the conversation with the third gentleman on the airplane, because, you know, when he said to me, I don't see color, I don't see red, you know, I don't see color, I really had to think, am I going to take that on?
Mm-hmm.
We were having such a nice conversation.
Then you have to bring
You
that
know,
up.
what if I call him on this, what is going to happen? And when I did, you know, his response was, what other inane thing have I said? And I appreciated that so much, because that statement was, from your point of view, that made no sense. So if it didn't make sense to you, I need to rethink that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a conversation.
Yes.
And his ability to leave that conversation and rethink other things that he said is the continuing of a conversation, even without me in the room.
Right.
So I didn't feel that work as work. I felt that conversation as showing up for myself, showing up for him, showing up for the greater good of the mode of discussion we were in.
Yeah.
You know, I've had conversations with white men where they have said, well, what is this redlining? And I said, do you have a phone? You could look it up. You know, because it's not I don't function as a dictionary or the internet.
Right.
That's a different thing. That's work.
Mm-hmm.
But this thing of somebody saying something to you and you replying and showing fully up and taking responsibility for what you're going to say. I mean, I did realize that when I said, you know, ain't I a Black woman? What the hell does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
That would come with one reaction or another. And I was prepared to take whatever reaction that came.
Yeah.
But that to me is showing up.
Yeah. And there is a fine line, right, between that response around look it up on your phone and then being in some ways to share or enlighten, in the case for the I think the second gentleman who actually leaned into the conversation. And I am imagining that you took something away. It's a bilateral learning opportunity. So you've actually taken something away from that conversation, not that you've just given him something, which helps balance that.
Exactly. I mean, I was very pleased with myself. Please, as I said in the essay, that I didn't abdicate to comfort.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's my personal thing. You know, it's so easy to do the thing that will allow everybody to just feel comfortable, except later when you're lying in bed thinking, why did I say that?
Yes.
You know, and so one of the things that I've been trying to train myself, and this is not something that has come naturally to me, is not to do that, not to be ruled by civility, which is not to be rude or uncivil, but not to be ruled by the desire to have comfort always, not to see success as a lack of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but sometimes success is when we feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it has moved us forward a little bit further.
Yeah.
You're right on the edge of another big idea in the book that we've been knocking around, David and I, and with Kevin, which is this notion of trying to name the problem without becoming the problem, or maybe go ahead and become the problem and name the problem. Could you talk a little bit about where you are on that whole journey of naming a problem and becoming a problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, you know, there are two avenues that I've been thinking a lot about around that. One of them is the word ally.
Yeah.
You know, like white people saying, I'm an ally, Black people. It really grates on me when white people do that. And I know people use it all the time, but it really grates on me because I feel that the problems are human problems. And so everybody should be able to say, I don't support that. I don't need to be in the camps at the border. I don't consider myself an ally. I consider myself a human being who thinks that's unconscionable. So I don't speak of it as I'm going to be an ally to the people who have been the children who have been put in those camps. I see it as that is unconscionable and I do not support that. And whatever I need to do to stop this government from doing that, I need to do. And I feel like anti-Blackness should be the same thing for white people. They shouldn't be talking about being Black people's allies. They should be talking about stopping inhuman practices against another human being. And knowing that those inhuman practices are happening because that person is Black. So I'm not saying that they deny how race is functioning, but they recognize that race is functioning, but also recognize that it is unacceptable to them.
Yeah.
Not that they are going to come and help me. And this thing about helping me, I'm just like, stop it, stop it. You should not, So the naming of the problem should be all of our naming of the problem. It shouldn't be, and the reason why the person who names a problem can become the problem is because so often the person who is naming the problem is also subject to whatever injustice is coming at them. If it's a woman, if it's a Black person, if it's homophobia, if it's whatever it is, anti-Semitism, when in fact, it should be popcorn. It should be, you should know where the person is coming from. If the injustice is there, anybody should be naming it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it wouldn't be like, oh, there goes the Black person talking about, or, one of the things that's happening now is a lot of white people are saying, what's the phrase? There's been so much attention to diversity, too much attention to diversity. and we need to move on from that.
Yeah.
And if it were, and that's a kind of coded way of the Black people have had enough time.
Mm-hmm.
We put enough time and energy and funds into that. Let's move on to something.
That's enough.
That's enough.
2 terms, that's it.
Yeah, that's enough. But if it were everybody's problem, then you couldn't be, and I hate to use the term, but I'm going to ghettoizing it in that way. Yeah. So I think, so that's how the naming of the problem and the allyship, to me, don't serve each other.
Yeah.
I do think it's, at least my observed experience, and I'm curious what you think. I feel like as a white man, I can name the problem without becoming the problem in the same way. Right. People will be like, oh, there he goes again, or oh, whatever. But I don't get, I'm not on the same risk in a room full of white people if I name the problem, let alone in a diverse room if I name the problem, as say David Howse might be in that same room as the person to name it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how far we are from, a sort of equal risks there or equivalent impact, I guess.
But I think if David, you weren't in the room naming the problem by yourself, you wouldn't necessarily be the problem.
You mean David?
If you could rely on other people in that room, whatever room it is, bringing, even if you weren't paying attention, if you knew that somebody else in the room would bring it up, would be like, wait a second. Then so that's what I'm talking about. We need to have the room be accountable.
Yeah. And I think that desired state, and to David's point, there's a sense of real urgency to get to that place where when I speak on something, it's not as if it's self-serving, because you talk about the person speaking is the person who's been oppressed. Mm-hmm. That is the lived experience. And in so many of these cases, because of lack of or fear of being aligned with the wrong movement, in those rooms where you do have, these term allies, sometimes they don't actually speak up in those moments. And so I think this notion of getting closer to how you describe, these are human challenges. They're all of our problems. That lived experience, catching up with that sort of ambition of where we want to be, is something I'm really interested in, because I still feel anytime, I remember when I came to ArtsEmerson, just in my very being, people assumed I was going to make this a Black theater. And anytime I talked about support for Black artists, it became self-serving. I had a hidden agenda there. And I'm like, the agenda is that we're going to support Black artists, it doesn't have to be hidden there. But I do think we are a bit of ways from understanding, the problem, because that's why I can't speak, but I should say that I've observed that many people who have been in that oppressed state don't actually speak up because it exposes themselves. It's like, oh my God, here we go again. Of course you're going to say that. And so we hold back from speaking that truth to which you spoke earlier around staying in the conversation and keeping those lived experiences on the forefront.
And I think that's the other side of it. I mean, we cannot be silenced by other people's projection of a single story around our being because we're Black. We have to have a freedom to speak if we need to speak. And that has taken training. I mean, I people will say to me, how come you can just talk? I wasn't just talking. I trained myself. Because you have to, I mean, we're smart people. We know what people are thinking. We know we've been in the rooms enough time to know what will be responded to, how it will be received, and what will come at us. And at a certain point, you just have to be whatever. I'm here, and I'm not going to be silenced by the projections of white people on Blackness, because it's not even about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're starting to get some questions coming in through the people who are watching. So if you are interested in posing a question, you can use the chat in YouTube or put it on Twitter or however it is that you're watching this conversation, and we'll find it. And those questions will float in, hopefully, as we go. I have a related question, though, one more topic to throw out there, and it relates to the white card and something that you've also written in Just Us, Claudia. And I was struck in the white card by the degree to which, and I'm going to generalize and say the white audience, but white people in the audience rejected the notion of Charles as standing in for white men because of the prison, because of his son, whatever the reasons, like, well, that white man doesn't represent all white men. And I wondered why, I don't think necessarily that Edward Albee's characters represent all white men either. I don't think that Tennessee was there was never, those pressures weren't there. And I just wondered if that critique to you, made any sense, or you had any response to it or learned anything from it. But it seemed to me that it was a critique that was coming from a sense of being represented. Some other wrote about me, and now I'm being represented in a way that, we always see other cultures, white people always see other cultures having to stand in for everybody. One story covers everything. And somehow people just really couldn't take a story about a man who made his money in prisons and his son was in one as a story about whiteness.
Yeah, this is the thing that I have been gifted with in my life. Because I started as a poet, I have never really felt that I was inside the marketplace of the art world. Mm-hmm. And so when I started working on plays, I didn't expect to get good reviews. Mm-hmm. Partly because you cannot write material about the people who are reviewing you and expect them to then applaud you for critiquing them.
True.
So I didn't go in thinking, oh yes, that white guy at the Boston Globe is gonna love this, and luckily I have managed to come into contact with people like the two of you, who have, and Diane Paulus and people, Melanie Joseph, people who have allowed me to do my work without asking me to conform to what will play in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And because I know this might sound full of hubris, but because I am good at what I do, the work has found its way.
Mhm.
So and that has just been through experience. It has just found its way. It has found its people. In fact, I remember going to the white card, and a white couple came up to me and said, "You know, I read the reviews and they were so bad. We weren't coming. But then a friend of ours came to see the play and they said, we must come. And so we came. And now we're so happy we came."
Mhm.
So that's what I mean. I really, I'm a little bit like Blanche Dubois. I depend on the goodness of other people. That people will come, they will see that the work is actually not trying to be unfair. It's trying to look at and ask relevant questions, and bring forward issues that are at play in our lives. And I really believe the work would not have the success it has had. And the success is not really in the place that you expect success to happen,
Mhm.
but it is within the readership and the viewership of my work. Um, if people didn't also recognize the things that they know. So the work is not creating something for them, but rather
Mhm.
reflecting already what they know.
Mhm.
And it's that knowledge that they're seeing what they know that allows them to then go and say to their friends, "Oh, you should go see that actually,"
Mhm.
or "You should read this book," or, so that's what I have put my faith in other people and my own talent as a writer. And my good judgment in terms of the people I collaborate with,
Mhm.
in terms and the luck of that in my career, because in terms of reviews, that has, that's not the place, and not just from white people. I mean, some of the most curious reviews around Just Us were written by Black women. It's like people want what they want.
Yeah.
And if you give them something that is more complex, they're and they have the power to reject it, they will reject it.
Can I do, because I know there are some questions that are coming through, and because you are so good at what you do, and I wholeheartedly agree, um, I imagine people see you as a diversity, equity, inclusion sort of specialist. And I wonder how you reconcile that coming from as a poet, into writing as an artist, in as a thought leader, as a thinker, how you reconcile those two. And when you get those, and there's some questions around how to think about diversity, there are questions, around your pedagogy and teaching people how to have more meaningful conversations. How do you balance those two demands on your intellect and on your wisdom?
I'm going to answer this with a story, as I often do, but I once was invited to be in one of these discussions with actual diversity people. And I could see the pain on their faces when I would answer questions because I was not doing it correctly. Don't say that. So I don't do those things anymore, because it is true. Those people are trained to do what they do. They have long careers. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. That's what I do. And the fact that the work takes up these questions doesn't mean that I'm an expert.
Mm-hmm.
It means that I'm curious.
Yeah.
It means that I wanna know. I want to ask these questions. And Justice is a book about ask. I think maybe people will stop asking me after they read. I'll be like, "Oh, she doesn't know."
Exactly.
She's got as
No,
many questions as we've got.
yeah. And I think there's so much teaching in the vulnerability. And because as you alluded to earlier, your experiences with your family and your workplace, there's this notion that at a certain level, you become exempt from these issues. And I think your vulnerability is the teacher, and the notion of encouraging people through your stories to stay in the conversation, that is the work, right? And so I think this notion of being able to stand fully in your artistry with this body of questions, and more questions that are coming up, as a way for us as the reader and the students to really wrestle with our own truth in these moments, and not necessarily, it's so easy to say, well, Claudia Rankine said this, and so I'm going to do this, right? It's about our own journey towards that truth and toward that understanding of our common humanity. But I know that that's, I'm sure, is a question that comes up all the time. How do you do this? How do I have this conversation? And clearly, as you're saying, that you are curious, just as curious as we are, and
Yeah.
willing to talk publicly about this curiosity.
Well, I mean, I think when we encounter art, when we see a play, when we read a book, when we read a poem, we don't go to it for solutions.
Right.
We go to it, and if it gives back to us an opening into our own lives, that's success. That's that's why we carry it with us, because it opens up new questions. It is recognizable in ways that are beyond its trappings in a way. And that's actually my goal, to create that experience, to create that process, not to offer solutions that I don't really have. I don't have answers to this. How do you create an ending to something that doesn't have an ending?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah. I also want to say, for the benefit of the people listening, because you already know this about yourself, but one of the things that I've really admired about working with you and just knowing you all these years as an artist, is the way in which your total worldview is as an artist. And even in the things that you're making, like, people will say, oh, she wrote Citizen, but you actually made Citizen. I mean, Citizen is as much its paper that it's printed on, and the layout on the page, and the inclusion of the videos that don't live in the book. And I mean, it's a work of art that manifests in book form and beyond. White Card, similarly, it wasn't just that you wrote the text of that, how it was set. It was ridiculous for us to take a 600 seat theater and make it a 300 seat white box, but the box itself was part of the art, and that whole thing was the art you made. And even the book, I mean, when you talk about the way this book Just Us is laid out, and the conversation, the argument across the facing pages, and the size of the book. I mean, someone said when they got it, was it you, David? Wow, this book is heavy. And it was heavy. It actually weighs. It has weight to it. That I think people often, that they discount the degree to which you've approached the whole thing as art. And give away certain elements of what you created as art as just happenstance in the way that they've received the art. But I want people who are picking up your work to really understand the degree to which many people never saw the bus tour, and their lives are poorer for it. But there was a piece when I first met Claudia. Claudia wrote a text of the Bronx. It's a first person text of the Bronx, is like a 40-year-old woman, right? Or about that age. You encountered the text through headphones, sitting on a bus that was driven through the South Bronx. And everything about that experience, as random as it was, you referenced Melanie Joseph earlier, which is what brought me back to it. You and Melanie created this experience that was so full, and also full of randomness. I mean, the day I was on the bus, who were the people walking away from the prison? Those were not the same people that another day, and some days there were probably none. And we were driving by an eviction. I'm sure you don't always drive by an eviction. That wasn't staged, but it was still contained in the art, in what you made it as art, created the possibility for all of those experiences. And I think that if people think of you as the person who creates the text, they're missing a lot of what you're putting into your own work, and how you can receive from Claudia what Claudia is creating for us to encounter. So that's just a little commercial about Claudia's work. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you. But it's also, I think, I appreciate it because it is true. The words are essential, but the entire atmosphere, the pacing, the art, the artwork that's often included, everything is what allows for the entrance into the work so that you can then take it and go where you want to go with it. And so it's not an attempt to close down the work into a closed system, but to actually open it out so that you can move out and through it.
I found I was going to try to grab the image and show it, but there's an essay in here about the woman whose son had colored Goldilocks in a coloring book at school, colored Goldilocks' face brown, and another student who was an Asian boy
Here it
thought
is.
Yes.
thought he had ruined Goldilocks.
Yeah.
And the essay itself is powerful, but you encounter the picture itself and the joy and the childlike understanding of the world in the picture as well. Like there's a whole essay in the picture. And so anyway, all of those choices are yours, and people shouldn't overlook the dimensions of your work as they're encountering.
They're mine with the generosity of the parents of that child who allowed me to replicate it. And so I couldn't make this work without the generosity of my friends who, especially Justice, who allowed their conversations, their words, their responses, things like their children's drawings to be included.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
I just wondered, David, did you want to actually do some of the questions? I know you summed up some, but I guess I do want to hear you a little bit on this one, Claudia. Is diversity, quad diversity, the word itself, is diversity a meaningful goal, even for employer or school? Or is it specific enough? Does it take us enough places?
The word I like is equity. I mean, I feel like if we create equity, then it doesn't really matter who's in the room. In a way, diversity seems to allow people to think that we've given to the NAACP and we're good. Whereas equity means that across the various levels of whatever organization or whatever corporation or whatever school or university, wherever you are, if we are taking care of everyone, then everyone will be taken care of. Mm-hmm. So the idea of equity to me would serve us better, but the reason diversity is in place is because despite attempts at equity, there have been targeted mechanisms put into place to disallow Black people from having access to that equity. Yeah. I mean, we saw that with the election. I mean, this was out and out voter suppression of Black communities, even though voting is supposed to be a democratic process in which we all have access to it. So I understand why diversity comes into play, because even when equity is put in place, then other redlining, all kinds of moves are made to make sure Black people don't have access. But if equity were to work, if it, in an ideal world, then we would all have access.
David, you have a question?
I just want to go back to something you said, Claudia, earlier, and it's a question that I have. You talked very early on, and I know we're kind of coming towards the end here, but you talked very early on about the book is not for everyone. And I'm curious to hear in your thoughts who it's not for and why.
Well, I don't mean it could be for everyone, but not everyone will be open to, you have to be a reader to read this book. Mm-hmm. You can't be somebody who's looking for a solution. Mm. If you're looking for a solution, if you're reading the book and you're looking for a solution, you're going to be like, what is the solution? What is the answer to diversity? Yeah. What is the answer You know, where are the answers? There are no answers in this book. And that's been where, you know, why isn't this book more about Black people? I've had people
Did you say someone asked you, like, where's the strategy, right? There's
yeah,
no
where's the strategy? Where's the Black people? Where's the, as if you can have white supremacy without anti-Blackness. That to me is an odd notion. So if you're the type of reader who, you know, who's paging through looking for the answer, then the book can't be for you. It's which doesn't mean that you will always be that kind of reader, but if that's the reader you are today, then it's not for you. If you're the kind of reader who are open to entering inside a process and allowing yourself to be engaged in the way that one is engaged in a conversation, then the book is for you. You know, the book is an invitation towards considering the making of questions and the asking of questions and the complicated process of what happens when you hold those questions open for yourself for longer than even the conversation you're in. What does that open up in you? What do you learn about yourselves? I mean, those are the kinds of processes that I was sort of interested in myself.
Can I ask you formally about the first poem that opens the book? And maybe I'm going to ask if you would be willing to read a section of it.
Sure.
Because what I was struck by when I went back today, I don't know quite why today, I was really struck by what you titled as section 2. And here's my vulnerable question. Mm-hmm. Is that a horrible thing to say, hey, can you jump into section 2 of a poem and go right by section 1, mm-hmm. given all of what you put into composing the experience? And if so, then read from section 1. But
No, I can read from section 2 because, you know, the whole point of this book is that it's an open text. In a way, you can read and put it down and come back to it and read and put it down and come back to it. That, you know, there is resignation in my voice when I say I feel myself slowing down, gauging like a machine the levels of my response. I remain within so sore, I think there is no other way than release. So I ask questions like I know how. In the loneliness of my questioning. What still is true? There isn't even a tremor when one is this historied out. I could build a container to carry this being, a container to hold all, though we were never about completeness. We were never to be whole. I stand in your considered thoughts, also broken, also unknown. Extending one sentence, here, I am here, as I've known you, as I'll never know you, I am here. Whatever is being expressed, what if? I am here awaiting, waiting for you, in the what if, in the question, in the conditionals, in the imperatives, what if? And, you know, that for me is a poem about the imaginative possibilities of human beings. You know, where can we go beyond where we have been stuck for 400 years?
We got to an end. That took us right to time. And what a question. Where can we go? What if? What if? I mean, I love that you start the book there, Claudia, and I'm really happy to sort of end this part with the audience. Leave us there. We haven't answered it.
Thank you, Claudia, for your questions and the space that you make for all of us to try to figure out our future together. And I think you give us a lot to consider. And so you're such a gift to all of us, certainly here at ArtsEmerson, but to the world, generally speaking. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm really grateful for all that you bring to us.
Well, thank you. I thank you both. And I want to say happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, happy Kwanzaa.
All the things.
Happy, happy, happy.
Happy Electoral College Day.
It's happy electoral. Stacey Abrams. Happy Stacey Abrams. She announced
Stacey Abrams
all
Day.
of the electoral votes for Biden today.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Happy
Well,
Stacey Abrams.
Happy Stacey.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Claudia.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The conversation will be available on Zoom for anyone who missed it. You'll be able to see it later.